Hello. Gee, that sounded very dramatic. Hi. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. It's a show designed to make the world safe for ADHD. And I'm a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I'm also the father of an ADHD adult. Back at the time when my child was young, we didn't really know much about ADHD, and I will repeat this over and over again, but I made it through a clinical psychology program without once ever hearing about ADHD. I still am amazed at that. I had to pick up everything I knew later on, and now my practice is probably close to 50% ADHD, whether I'm evaluating kids or I'm evaluating adults. It's a lot of evaluation. When my child was young, probably the big question was whether or not there was such a thing as ADHD. Did it really exist, or was it just something made up to be an excuse for poor parenting? That was the one that used to really frustrate me. It has gone from that, it's pretty much accepted now. Okay, if you have a bunch of people around you saying there's no such thing, they are really out of touch. Okay, there is so much research that is ongoing, that is consistent in indicating that there is such a thing. It is a real thing. There are actual brain differences in ADHD people versus neurotypicals. There's really no doubt about it. Plus, it's 85% heritable. So that means that's high. That's really high, okay? If you know anything about heritability indices, it's really high. 85% is really high. We get around 50%. We think that's a lot. That's proven that it's heritable, that it's genetic. Okay, and so now we know that it is highly inheritable, and that honestly, if you have an ADHD child somewhere in your family tree or your spouse's family tree, there are other ADHDers, whether or not they've ever been diagnosed or not. They are there. And that's brings us to the what's going on right now, is that a lot of people, I think, have tried to eliminate the sort of stigma, if you will, about a disability, having a disabled child, having a child with special needs, all that stuff. And I think that's a reasonable effort, but I think perhaps sometimes it gets overdone. I was looking online somewhere. It probably was one of the ADHD groups on Facebook that I follow. The guy was just, I think it was a male, I'm not even sure of that, but was complaining bitterly about all this talk about ADHD being a superpower and all you had to do is learn how to use your superpower and life would be wonderful. I got the sense that the superpower didn't exactly describe his life, but he was bitterly opposed, to all kinds of discussion about that. And I have to admit that it's a tricky distinction you're trying to make when you talk about ADHD as a disability or ADHD as having a superpower. All that usually means that whoever wrote it either doesn't have ADHD or has managed to compensate some way or other for his or her ADHD. And I think we would do well to hold in mind that it still causes serious problems for a large number, perhaps most of the people who have ADHD, and that there are reasons why you get special accommodations in school if you're diagnosed with ADHD. On the other hand, you have some things that make it more likely that you can do well in certain areas because of your ADHD. We've talked a lot about the entrepreneurial stuff and how ADHDers are just born to be entrepreneurs because they can make quick decisions, handle the risk better than most, and are outside the box thinkers. Okay, yeah, that's true, but the idea that you're going to be an entrepreneur suggests that you've managed to make certain adjustments to your ADHD so that you have learned enough one way or another, whether it was in traditional academics or on the job or whatnot. It's just that the idea that somehow or other you've gotten yourself so that you have enough specialized information that you could consider starting your own business. And, great. But we know that ADHD is a wide-ranging disorder. I mean, you can have a little bit of it or you can have a whole bunch of it. And if you've got a whole bunch of it, it's going to be more of a struggle. Of course, the other thing is that there are some things that make it easier for people with ADHD to do well in life. And, probably, and I'm not doing this because I'm in the business, but getting proper treatment as early as possible is really important. And people who have kids with ADHD, or that the teacher's saying probably has ADHD, or the nice psychologist says definitely has ADHD, and then you elect not to do anything for treatment, well, I wish you a lot of luck, but good Lord. People talk about, all this medication, they're gonna be drug addicts. No. The people with ADHD who have drug and alcohol problems are typically the ones who were never treated with, say, stimulant medication. They just somehow either the parents were really reluctant to treat, and I understand that. You don't want your child to be taking a lot of unnecessary medication, but if your child has ADHD that's significant enough that it's causing difficulties in school at an early age, you don't want to just forget about it and whistle and hope everything goes away. You will cause your child difficulties. Proper treatment leads to good results. And that's people who are properly treated with ADHD have fewer problems with substance abuse, fewer problems with employment, fewer problems academically, fewer problems with relationships. Okay? I mean, treatment for ADHD involves you, first of all, getting the self-knowledge, getting the awareness, and that you're likely to have difficulties in certain areas because you have ADHD. If you don't have that knowledge, then you start thinking the world's against you, or, just all sorts of outlandish sorts of explanations for why you keep getting fired, why you're always having troubles with the boss, why you can't remember an order from one minute to the next. If you know all of those things are symptomatic of ADHD, typically untreated, it's easier for you to find solutions. It's easier for you to say, whoa, I did forget my medication today, or I should recognize that I can't do that, and I should use my accommodations to get around that situation. That's the thing you learn in therapy. That's the thing you learn. Those are the things you learn. Okay, there are... Oh, okay, Beverly, thanks you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a hard decision. I'm not downplaying that, and I think it's a decision you. I mean, I personally, I'm a research kind of guy. I want to know what the facts are. I know what the science says, so I look all that stuff up. You can do that on the internet, but you got to be careful, because for everyone that is a scientifically researched, double-blind study, if you've heard of those are studies where one group gets the medication, the other group doesn't get the medication, and neither one knows which is which, and they're evaluated pre and post, and then if there's an effect, if there's a significant clinical difference, that's an accepted treatment. Okay, and that's what you don't get a lot of when you're Googling on the internet, because you get a lot of people's opinions. That's what we call case study. That's where you've got one person who did one thing and possibly got a good result, although we won't really know that because it's all impression. It's all subjective, not objective. There's no data. Okay, and that's the weakest form of research. Okay, that's not the kind of thing that your doctor typically looks to when he or she is trying to determine what medication you need for whatever physical problem or emotional problem you have. Okay, so you want to know the research. You want to know what's been proven. It is a well, like, I'm going to say, I started to say accepted fact. I'm not so sure it's an accepted fact in anybody, but folks who do a lot of treating of ADHD, but that the medication works. Any stimulant medication works for about 85% of all people with ADHD. That's just what the research says. That's not my opinion. That's research opinion. And it's a... well, it's you have to say those are the facts, and if, as much as people do not want to give their children medication or do not want them on medication for life, you've got to understand that the medications for ADHD have minimal side effects. In spite of the horror stories you read, the research is pretty much consistent in saying that there are minimal side effects. You don't grow horns out of your forehead, or go psychotic, or some of the other horror stories you read. That just doesn't happen because of the medication. I'm blocking on the name, but one of the best known researchers of on ADHD, who I've actually seen several times in different workshops, he once said, for any other disorder, if there were a treatment that was as effective as it is and has as few side effects, it would be considered criminal negligence not to prescribe it. Okay, now that's a really strong statement for a researcher to make to a group, a hall with like 300 clinicians in it, all of whom will jump on you at a heartbeat if they think you're feeding them a bunch of baloney. Everybody accepted it. Everybody's, well, yeah, that's pretty much right. That's what happens. And in my own career, I have had, I don't know how many times parents come up to me, oh my God, you wouldn't believe the difference. And I just want to encourage you that treatment works, okay? Treatment keeps it from being a lifelong disability, okay? It becomes just another problem that you have to deal with. it's not that different from, wanting to be a basketball player but being 5'6". There's nothing you can do about that, except either learn to shoot the 3-pointer or become an incredible ball handler. But even then, you have to accept that you're going to have more troubles than the guy who's 7 feet tall. That's the nature of life. That's the nature of the game of basketball. The nature of the game of life for an ADHDer is that if you have got it and you learn to control it, you learn what you need to do, what accommodations you need, what procedures you need to follow to be functional, life is doable. It's not perfect. It's not as easy as it is for some other people, but you can't waste your time thinking about that. You've got to get on the ball and do what you need to do. And, there are lots of things that help make managing ADHD possible. Proper treatment, including the medication, relaxation training, resiliency training. That's basically a fancy way of saying teaching your kiddo never to give up. Be persistent. Emotional control training. A lot of people, I'm never sure why, a lot of people think that emotions are out of your control, that you don't have anything to say about your emotions. It just happens. And I don't know why that is. I have an easier time convincing somebody that they can lose 50 pounds in 50 days than that they can control their emotions and their thinking. I do not understand that totally, but it's just the way it seems to work. But if you learn that your emotions are a product of your assumptions and your thinking, then you learn to control them. Okay, and then you can moderate less. You're never going to be emotionally neutral. That isn't even desirable. But you will at least be able to exert some control of it. And then the next kind of things that you need is self-awareness. You need to be aware of, because everything we do in life has got patterns. If we get into trouble, there are patterns of how we get into trouble. How do we get stressed? How do we get anxious? How do we get angry? How do we get frustrated? There are ways that happens, and they are patterns, and it's almost like we're playing a little game with ourselves, with the emotion being the outcome. And you need to be aware of this, and that's another thing that you get when you do therapy. And probably the biggest main issue is acceptance. Okay, you have to accept that you have a way that your brain works that is not like everybody else's, and you have the choice. Either you accept it and learn to handle it, learn what you need to do that maybe other people don't need to do. Maybe you need to tape record all meetings. Other people don't have to do it. I said tape record, didn't I? You need to record all meetings, and other people don't have to. That's okay. That's not a big deal. But if you keep saying, I'll keep trying harder until I can do it. I'm sorry, dude. You're likely to end up more and more frustrated. Okay? You just have to accept that there are, like anybody else, everybody's got strengths. Everybody's got weaknesses. Just accept that there are some areas you have difficulties in. Doesn't even have to be it is. It definitely is, Beverly. It is empowering. Once you accept it, once you recognize that there are some things, you don't have to call it ADHD. Just say, I'm not very good at paying attention in meetings. Let it go with that. But figure out how you're going to compensate for that, and do it ahead of time. Don't wait till you're in there and think, oh, crazy, what am I going to do? This is boring. You have to figure out what works for you in given situations, and accepting that you have some difficulties in different areas. Should not be a big deal. It's usually when you have had some really bad training, let's put it that way, that becomes an issue, that you can't accept that there might be something wrong with you, or that something that is less than totally perfect. You have to accept that, like everybody else on the planet, there are certain strengths that you have, there are certain weaknesses, and there are probably a whole bunch more things that are kind of in the middle that you're sort of pretty good at, but not necessarily great. Fine. How do you learn to compensate for the weakness areas? How do you learn? And anything people do pretty much is based on what we've learned. And so anything that we've learned, we can also learn how to handle it better. It's just the nature of the human beast. And I think this is becoming a bit of a rant, but I think it's important that people realize, you don't want to necessarily, is it a disability or is it something else, just a difference? Really doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is, what are you going to do about it? And the things you need to do about it are all pretty consistent, proper treatment, proper medication, and therapy, tons of therapy. Okay, just don't think that, that therapy stuff. No, pills, as we in the non-prescribing part of the world say, pills do not teach skills. And if you have ADHD or your child has ADHD, both you and he or she are going to have to learn how to compensate. You have to learn what you need to do better. Handling your emotions, handling your inattention, handling your poor working memory problem, handling your limited frustration tolerance, all those things. You have to learn to do it. And the first step is to accept that there's some differences. The second thing to accept is that you have to develop compensatory strategies, some things you do that work for you. I mean, we all have to do it some way or other, but in this particular situation, it's more important than it is if you're the 5'6" basketball player, okay, so he doesn't get to play in the NBA. He'll learn to do something else, or he better. Let's put it that way. Okay, that is kind of me for today. And thank you for your comments. And we will catch you next week, as usual. And I am Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. We're the show that tries to make the world safe for ADHD. Because remember, people who think in the box don't solve the world's problems. It's only people who think outside the box that solve the world's problems. And your child may be the one that solves our biggest problems. So be encouraging, okay? Be motivating. Encourage resilience. Okay, you can leave me messages, and some of you have, and I appreciate that. Leave me any ideas you might have for future subjects I should consider commenting on. Like I say, I've been doing this for a long time, a lot of decades, and accidentally or on purpose, I've learned a whole bunch. So, we will catch you next time. I am on the internet. My website is terrygingrasphd.com, and there's a lot of things about all the different areas that I'm involved in. I do a lot of work with ADHD, obviously. I do a lot of assessments and that sort of thing. I do coaching. I do high performance coaching. That's usually for ADHD executives, and entrepreneurs. Okay, so we will catch you next week. Thank you for watching.